Yes. So it seems like everyone is back at this point. It looks like we're not scheduled to start for another 2 minutes, but screw it. We're going to mightily tempt the demo gods today, so might as well get any extra time we can. So welcome to a presentation about Unicorn 2. I just released Unicorn 2 to the wild 3 days ago. There is a bug that I know about in it with really, really long item paths that I'm working on fixing today. For the people who have done Sitecore sites, with the possible exception of Wendy, you've largely used Unicorn before. But I will go over the very basics really quickly so people get what it is. So when you are dealing with a Sitecore site, you make a lot of code, but a lot of times that code, for example, your renderings and your layouts, have to be registered inside of Sitecore, which creates a Sitecore item that lives in the database. As you might imagine, when you're doing development on a team and every team member has their own database, the problem quickly becomes that part of your code is in the code base and in Git, and the rest of your code is in Sitecore and in the database. And since you're not sharing databases, you need some sort of way that you can effectively turn your database into code. So obviously, SQL databases, you can't throw them in Git. And so that becomes a problem because you don't want to start copying SQL scripts between people's computers. Sitecore supports packaging where you can take items and turn them into a zip file and install them, but unfortunately the creation and installation process of packages is kind of clunky. And although it works, it tends to end up being that you forget, one of the 40 packages that you guys were sharing in the last week during heavy development, and then something breaks on production because you forgot it and nobody knows what to do with it. So packaging is really, really tedious and cumbersome. And the solution, this was most of the work in creating this presentation, by the way, and no, I did not draw that. So what Unicorn does is Sitecore has a built-in system where you can take a content item and you can serialize it into an item file, which is it almost looks like a .ini file type framework where you've got each field stacked on top of each other in a text file. It's very human readable. And so what Unicorn does is it takes Sitecore's built-in serialization and lets you take the content items that matter to you, that you are writing code that has to register against in Sitecore, and serialize them automatically to your disk as an item file, which you can then put into Git. So at that point, you've got a way that you can share the items that you've worked on between yourself and other developers. And what Unicorn does is it has a data provider inside of Sitecore that basically intercepts item saves, renames, moves, template changes, all sorts of things like that. Basically anything that would modify the serialized item on disk and automatically updates the item as the item is saved. So anytime a developer makes a change and they go do their next Git commit, they'll see a .item file that represents that item shown in their files that are ready to commit list. So the second half of the way Unicorn works is obviously you've got all these item files on disk, but that doesn't put them into anybody else's database. So to get them in somebody else's database, there's a synchronization control panel where you basically can go and hit a button on the web and it reads the files that are on disk right now on your instances of Sitecore and synchronizes what's in your database in the areas that Unicorn is controlling to what's on the disk. This has a pretty nice advantage over manual synchronization because, say Wendy changed a Sitecore item and then I changed the same Sitecore item. Well, at that point, it becomes a Git merge on disk, like a text merge, instead of being some kind of crazy SQL-based, merge fix type of thing. And you can take advantage of all the work that the people who did Git or Subversion or whatever you're using for source control did for file merging. And you can use beyond compare or whatever else you want to use. The only caveat is that there's a content length that you have to fix sometimes because each field has a content length, and if you merge it, you have to make sure to recalculate the length correctly, but that's not that difficult. So Unicorn 2 is new. It's a new version of the tool that we've been using for a long time. It's got a whole bunch of new stuff in it that basically means it's a little bit safer than Unicorn 1. It's a little bit faster. It logs things a bit better, and it is significantly more fast. The other big thing is that, out of the box, the NuGet package will install on Sitecore 6.5. because what we were talking about earlier during the Sitecore panel, you have to have a separate .NET 4 and .NET 4.5 version to work with 6 and 7. And Unicorn, although it's always been pretty easy to compile against earlier versions of Sitecore 6, you'd have to do it from source. And now it's just out of the box, click from NuGet and install. So this is the part where we start tempting the demo gods, because I'm sure all this has been interesting as heck so far, but I'm sure you would rather actually see it do stuff. So this is a tool, and I'm sorry it's small, there's not much I can do to make it bigger, unfortunately, called Sitecore Instance Manager. It is a tool you can get off the Sitecore Marketplace, and it basically is designed to help you quickly install vanilla instances of Sitecore. The Sitecore support team developed this so that they could start replicating people's tickets really quickly, and it's actually pretty convenient. Like you can go download Sitecore versions from SDN directly within here. It goes and downloads them and stores the zip file somewhere so it can use them. In my case, I happen to already have the ones that I want, so we're just going to quickly whip up a brand new Sitecore instance. We'll use the latest 7.2, and we'll call it Unicorn Demo, and we'll say next. Now the other thing you can do is you could have new packages and things, so you can tell it, I want DMS. I believe there's a way to get web forms for marketers and some other things. These are basically installing Sitecore packages. You can also put custom packaging things on top of here. For example, what we're going to do is add the website project to it, because that will be quicker than creating it with Visual Studio, and then we'll just let it run. And it connects, there's a configuration where you connect it to your local SQL server and stuff, and it basically sets all the connection strings in the data folder and stuff. It does a couple of things that I don't like it puts the data folder hard-coded to a path outside the web root and things like that, so it's not really that portable across multiple developers' machines compared with our usual installs. But you can't beat it if you just want a vanilla instance of Sitecore to test something on or fool around with a new Sitecore version or something like that. So as you can see, it's actually pretty fast. It's done. At this point, I now have a Sitecore, and I am going to tell it to log me in as an admin and open the solution in Visual Studio. Except that in this case, it's going to blow up. But open Visual Studio anyway. Go figure. Oh yeah, those demo gods. So I'll open it up here as well. It creates a hosts file entry for it as well. So at some point, when Firefox wants to respond again, and we load up here, it should just say, hey, look, it's welcome to Sitecore. So this is a Sitecore's latest 7.2 instance created in the span of about a minute and a half. All right, there we go. So here's its website project that it created in Visual Studio. It doesn't quite create projects quite the way we would, but it's all right. It's a great starting point. It also creates them for .NET 3.5 when we actually want 4.5 for Sitecore 7. So at this point, we should be able to just build it, and it will work. So if I go to NuGet packages, and go on NuGet.org, search for Unicorn, the most downloaded package on NuGet, of course. We find it right here. And if I hit install and accept the Ninject license terms, because this depends on the Ninject dependency injection toolkit. Now we basically, at this point, we have to run a build. So we have the assembly in the build folder, but other than that, we can now actually go to Unicorn Demo / unicorn.aspx. Hypothetically speaking, anyway. And we get access denied. And the reason why is because Unicorn has some security settings on its control panel. If you're doing local development, you normally will have compilation debug mode set on. But Sitecore's default web.config has compilation debug mode off. And if debug mode is off, as the error message suggested when we saw it here, and I probably should make that a little bigger, you have to actually sign into Sitecore to use it. So if you deploy Unicorn to a production server and you properly turn debug compilation off, you will have to sign into Sitecore to use it, but it'll still be available. But if you're doing it locally, like if I refresh this, it will let you just use it without being signed into Sitecore. So it's convenient if you're doing local testing. You don't have to fool around with authentication. So this is what you get when you first get here, and it has some big red error messages on it that if you read them, at least hypothetically if I did my job writing correctly, suggest what you ought to do. So what we ought to do in this case, so we installed Unicorn, and now we have a configuration, and if you see here, it's actually telling us what paths inside of Sitecore it's got included by default. The defaults are actually relatively sensible, but most of the time you're going to need to go to this app config include serialization.config, and then down here in the predicate you'll see all of these include and exclude paths. You can get pretty fancy with these. You can use templates by name, template IDs, item IDs, paths. You can put excludes under an item, so you can include a path but exclude some of its children. The default file is basically what we normally use with a brand new Sitecore site, because it catches most of the things you do. Like it catches common things you'd modify in the core database for things like web edit buttons. It captures templates and renderings in the master database, and it ignores all of your content, you'll note. One thing about Unicorn is it's not generally for test content. You don't want to put your content tree under Unicorn control, and the reason why is if somebody is actually doing content entry, you will quickly realize that Unicorn will sync their content changes out if they're working on the dev server. You can kind of get around that if you make a separate content tree just for test content. You can sync that, like basically a separate site just for testing. Then you can have the developers create test content there. So anyway, we'll just take the default config for this, and it tells us, it gives us a summary of the config so we can quickly review what we've got configured by default. We do not need to change any of these, and most people probably will not need to change any of these unless, for example, they want to put their serialized files somewhere else other than the default. And if I click this button, we get some ASCII art. And it goes and starts creating serialized files for us that represent, like basically it takes a copy of what's in Sitecore right now and serializes all of it to disk so we have something to sync against. Because if we started running a sync without actually having any files on disk, well, it's going to delete everything, and that would be bad. And there are checks to keep you from doing that. If the root is empty, it will not do anything. So at this point, what we've got is it's done reserializing the default configuration, and if we go check out the root here under data serialization, you'll see that now there's a core and a master folder in here, and you'll have to take my word that these were empty before we did this. And inside here there are all these .item files that represent the things that are included in this configuration. So this is what a .item file looks like. If you're using Unicorn, you probably will eventually have to figure out something about this format because you'll have to merge it. And so each field has a heading, an ID, name, key, and content length, and then below it is the value. If you're doing this, a lot of times the place where you'll get merge conflicts will be one of these, not the editor's field. But if you're doing team development and you're using web page editor, a lot of times you'll have conflicts on the placeholder settings item, because multiple people will be adding new renderings allowed in a placeholder when they're doing that. And so you'll end up having merge conflicts on this because the list of IDs will be changed in two places. So when you do that, you basically figure out which is the new ID, you paste it on the end of all of this with a pipe between it. You can see these are two pipe delimited grids. And then you just recalculate what the content length is. Personally, I'm lazy. I just use an online string length calculator and paste it in there instead of actually doing any math, because why do computer scientists need to do math, right? So if I go back to where I was, you will see that now it's actually changed around totally. It doesn't show me the configuration details, and now it puts sync and reserialize front and center. It tries to get the heck out of your way and let you focus on what you actually need to do, because now that we've got a serialize, we can actually run a sync. So if I run a sync, it will actually do absolutely nothing because everything is already in sync. not the Backstreet Boys. That was for you, Petra.
No Unicom reference? Come on.
So as you can see, it did absolutely nothing. But if we go back to one of these files, like say we edited the templates item for some weird reason, and we took, say, let's look for last updated. Oh darn, this one has lots of versions in different languages. We'll find something simpler, like sample item. So if we take the sample item and we find the English version, because there are multiple versions. So here's English version 1 right here. It has a version header. And so the versions get stacked on top of each other. When we were just scrolling through was the Danish version, because Sitecore is Danish, so of course it starts with the Danish version. So if I take the created by field here and say change this to cam, well, it was admin before, so in order to, well, I'll add one link to the characters. Save it, and then if I go run sync again, you'll see that it picked up that there was a field change on that item and reported that it had updated it. That's that U there, and then what exactly it updated. So that the white U there means that it updated the English version, version 1, and it changed the created by field. So if you see back in here, what we did is we modified the created by field in the English version 1, and if we go into Sitecore itself, and then go look at that sample item template, we will see that the created by has been changed from admin to me, which does not actually exist in this system. But Sitecore actually does not care if the created user exists because you could have deleted that user. So if we get the properties of this item, yeah, right here, created by Sitecore Camsar. So as with the cooking show, given that we have less than 10 minutes left, I came up with a second instance of Sitecore that I pre-cooked and did some things and put into Git so that I can show you sort of how the workflow works if you are using something like Git in a real workflow. So this is git bash. This is a command that conveniently shows you the difference of files between two branches. So I've got a pre-pull branch and I've got the master branch, and these are what's changed. So you can see that basically all I did is I created a few items. I actually created a template, or a new template, as well as creating some sample items which actually all exist on that template. So one of the neat things about Unicorn is it actually automatically will retry failures. So if you have both created a template and created items based on that template, and you pull all those changes in at once, and it happens to try and deserialize the items based on the template first, they'll fail, but it'll basically keep them in a queue so that after it's deserialized everything else, it will go back and retry those items. And now that the template exists that you deserialize later, they'll actually succeed. And that I actually cannot claim credit for that. That was part of the default Sitecore serialization stuff. I just made it a little bit more modular. So we're in this pre-pull branch right now, so if I check out master, that will basically apply the changes that we just saw in that list. And then if I go back here into my cooking show and run a sync, I can show you here that there are not really any content items under the root on this site. Except that I have to log back in apparently. So basically what I just did, I just changed branches, which is roughly like you get like if you were going to merge a pull request from somebody or otherwise pull in new commits from somebody else, you get changed item files from somebody else upstream. In this case, there were no merges. And did I not delete these? Apparently, I did not. So let me get rid of them before we do a sync. Make sure that the sample template doesn't exist. Okay, the sample template doesn't. Good. All right, so now we're back synced to the way we were before. So if I go with run a sync now, it will sync these things up in. And we realize that I think I deleted too many items because that's why we have this unable to resolve root. So it brought in, it added these template items. So you'll see the template is composed of multiple items. So there's the template item, there's the template section content, and then there's the field hello, and then there's the template standard values, which is pretty standard for Sitecore. And here I am trying to do Mac things and hit Command R. So I deleted too many things, unfortunately. Oh, I think I know what I need to do. That deletion actually got rid of the items I wanted. So if I do reset back to the root and not hit Command R again, there, now we have sample content that got synced in. And the reason why that is because those content items were already on disk, and I told Sitecore to delete them. Well, that means Unicorn's going to say, hey, do those item files exist on disk? Oh, they do. Great. Well, you just deleted them, so I'm going to delete them off disk as well. So when we synced, of course, the items were not present on disk or in Sitecore because we just deleted them. So by resetting, we got them back. That kind of illustrates one really nice thing about Unicorn. It's almost like having undo for Sitecore. It's like, oh, I just screwed something up. Well, great. I can just reset everything to what I just got out of Git and resync, and, well, I just undid my mistakes. It's a lot easier to use than recycle bin or database backups. So that's the really quick version of Unicorn. It really is not that complex to use. It's mostly just like learning how to merge .item files and things like that. It's extremely wonderful for things like doing GitHub pull request-based workflows where you're doing code review because, as you saw, like we just switched branches, ran a sync, and got the content in there. Well, if you have someone who submitted a pull request to you, you can just switch to their branch to do code review, sync with Unicorn. You've got all their templates, renderings, code, test content, if you have test content site set up, and then you can just check it out and see exactly what they did. And if it's all good, you merge it. Next time a continuous integration build runs, there is an API you can use to hit this control panel in such a way that you get text output back from it. And so there's actually some samples in the Unicorn docs of how to do that. So you just you deploy your site, the CI, and then you have the last thing you do, run an HTTP call to the site that you just deployed and hit this control panel, and it syncs all of the items that got deployed back up in it. So literally you merge a branch into something that's off a CI, and then 15 minutes later all the templates and stuff have shown up in your site. Depending on how your stuff is configured, you could have it automatically publish after it's done that too. So then at that point, you basically have an automatically updating Sitecore site that's pretty hard to screw up by doing something that's unexpected. So that's that. Questions? I think we have about 3 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, the item serialization, are you doing anything custom there, or is that all out of the box Sitecore?
It is, the serialization itself is all out of the box Sitecore. The deserialization, there's actually a custom routine that we use that basically just allows us to instrument the default deserialization slightly more. So we like being able to show that we changed the created by field is something that's changed. So that's not something you can do with the default deserialization that just does everything and doesn't tell you what it did. So we basically get a little more instrumentation out of it.
So out of the box, what version Sitecore is Unicorn 2 support?
I have tested it on the latest patch of 6.5. 7.1 and 7.2, and it seems to work just fine on all of them. It does not use any particularly weird Sitecore API stuff. The unicorn.aspx page that we've been using is hooked in by actually a HTTP request begin pipeline handler. It's not actually a handler that has to get registered in the web.config. And so it actually, literally you can install Unicorn manually by just copying Unicorn DLL, an inject DLL, and then putting that serialization.config in there. So if you have some sort of build process like Beaver that lets you run XML transformations as part of your deploy, you can very easily remove this out of your site being available if you want by just getting rid of the HTTP request begin pipeline handler. Just make sure you only do that on delivery sites that you're not going to deploy to with CI, because obviously if you get rid of the handler, you can't run a sync on it.
I have a more general question.
So what's your experience been with open sourcing this, Cam? Yesterday in the Fed panel, Christoph mentioned wanting to contribute more to open source on the front end side, and you've been one of the folks here at iSight that's kind of led that initiative to get some of your work out there in the kind of the public domain. And this seems like a particularly kind of challenging thing to have be an open source project, because you're dealing with oftentimes like continuous integration, some complicated things where your part here could work really well, but all the things around it could become a hot mess, and somebody using it could need a lot of hand-holding. What's your experience been like?
It's actually been pretty good. I think there's about 4 or 5 forks and about 25 stars right now on GitHub. I've had a bunch of issues from various people who have reported a bunch of generally pretty good issues that have been like legitimate bugs. I try and get on them and fix them, both because I like to support the community of Sitecore people who usually are pretty smart, and because it's defensive. I use Unicorn every day, so I don't want bugs in it either. But it has been interesting. Like, I think most of the people who actually have contacted me and stuff about using Unicorn have been outside the United States. Some people in the Netherlands and the UK. Mostly, actually.
So overall, a pretty good experience?
Yeah, pretty good experience. Like, it's, don't expect like crazy uptake overnight. I honestly have no idea how many people use it. I think the NuGet package all told has like 350 downloads, but keep in mind every time a new site's built on a CI server, that's a download. So, that 350 may be more like 50 actual people, but I think some people are also using it from source, because the type of people who like open source projects are also sometimes the type of people who like to fool around with the source, I've got the 3 people who've contributed to the Unicorn code base now, myself included. Unicorn, it says 3 contributors on GitHub.
Thanks.
Now I want to see you guys in that contributors list, by the way.
When will the second unicorn be added to the ASCII art?
I thought about it, but I figured it would be more useful to spend the time fixing the issues in the actual code. I spent enough time getting the ASCII art. It was a necessity. It was up high priority in the code and the punch list for a while to get that in there.
We're using this on life size, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've noticed all of the stuff you were showing.
And I'm working on putting it into debut right now.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Next up is